In 2009, I had to have not one, not two, but 3 surgeries. First, I had a C-section in May of 2009. Then I had my wisdom teeth out 2 months later. And then I had my appendix out just a couple months after that. But I'm going to talk about what happened with my appendix because that was kind of funny. We came down with the swine flu, my daughter, my son, and I, the day before Halloween, and I was so bummed out because I had the coolest Halloween costumes planned out for us. I was going to make my kids prisoners, like little prisoner costumes, and I was going to be the fun police. But we ended up not being able to do that because we all had swine flu. We were puking our brains out, and it was just awful. I ended up crawling across my living room floor, laying next to my kitchen trash can, and my daughter comes over and she's like, "Mama, okay?" and petting my hair, asking me if I'm okay, and the whole room was just spinning. And then the next day I started feeling a little better. I was sick for like 2 days, and then I started feeling semi-better on the 3rd day, you know, when you're in between feeling good and bad. And I noticed I had a really sharp pain on my stomach right here when I went from standing to sitting and sitting to standing. But it was really brief, just for a second or so, and so I just kind of dismissed it. But then I noticed every hour it got worse and worse and worse. So finally I called up the doctor and I was like, "I think I'm sick. I think something's wrong. I think it's my appendix." And I knew right away it was my appendix because of where it was. And so I went into the doctor and they said, "Oh, you're probably just sore from having the swine flu. You'll be fine. Here's some antivirals. Go home, and here's some pain meds." And so I went home, and they gave me the pain meds, and I had somewhat of a tolerance to pain meds because of having had my C-section and my wisdom teeth out, but the pain meds weren't working, and it was to the point I was like, this isn't just a tolerance, this is not working. And it kept getting worse and worse, and so they said that the next morning, if it wasn't better, then I needed to call them and they'd get me in for a CAT scan right away. Anyways, they didn't get me in for a CAT scan right away, and I called and I was like, "Look, we need to get me in because it's hurting." And it just got to the point where I couldn't move, I couldn't do anything, and they finally get me in for a CAT scan at like 6:30 at night. I called them at like 8 in the morning. It was ridiculous, and I'm in the waiting room, sweating like crocodile tears out my forehead, and I'm shaking and crying, and I mean, I looked bad. And they get me back there and they get ready to do the CAT scan, and the guy looks at his chart and he said, "Did they do your pregnancy test?" And I was like, "What? I'm not pregnant." And they're like, "Well, you're a woman of childbearing age and you're not fixed, so we have to do a pregnancy test before we do a CAT scan. It's mandatory." And I'm looking at this guy like, "Are you serious?" And I asked him if he could just give me a stick to be on, and he wouldn't let me do it. He said that they had to do a blood test, and so it took another hour. And so I'm waiting in the waiting room and like about crying my eyes out. I'm sweating and shaking and I'm hot and like I'm confused and everything's spinning. I felt like I was drunk, but it wasn't, I hadn't drank anything. It was just from being so sick, and I had a fever. Anyways, they finally get me back into the CAT scan room after they get my negative pregnancy test, and they do the CAT scan, and the guy doesn't even say anything. He picks up the phone and says, "Prep the OR." Like, he doesn't even say anything to me. He picks up the phone and called someone and said, "You need to prep the OR." Next thing I know, they're wheeling me down the hallway and into the ER, and they have me in the ER, and they have like 5 or 6 nurses doing vitals and checking me out, and everyone's touching me everywhere, and I'm just shaking and confused, and I don't know what's going on. And somewhere in there, my mom showed up, and I have no clue when she came. I don't even remember calling her because I don't really remember much of anything I did during the time, but I probably did call her, otherwise I don't know how she would know. And so she came in, and next thing I know, we're going down this hallway, and my mom gives me a kiss and says, "I love you, Sam, you're going to be okay." And they take me in there, and they put an IV in, and I told them to tell me when they give me the stuff that's going to knock me out so I could count backwards, but I don't think they told me, because next thing I know, I woke up from surgery, and everything was done. But they gave me some morphine or something, and I fell asleep. This was after the surgery, and when I woke up, I started crying and screaming because I was breastfeeding my 5-month-old son. And I was also pumping to donate milk to these other babies that needed it. And so if you're not familiar, when you breastfeed, if you don't empty your breast every so often, they get really engorged and it hurts really bad. I mean, they'll get rock hard and it hurts. It makes you want to cry. And so I'm screaming at these nurses about my boobs and I'm delirious. And the nurse is going, honey, the doctor didn't do anything to your boobs. Your boobs are still there. They're fine. And I'm like, they hurt. And I'm crying and upset. And I didn't even think to tell them that I was breastfeeding because I was just so drugged and out of it. And finally, my husband's aunt works at the hospital and she comes in to come see me and she realizes what's going on and goes down to the maternity ward and gets me a pump to take care of it. So it was eventful to say the least. But yeah, I am now officially the only child of my mom. She has 7 that does not have an appendix. I think I'm actually the only person in my family that has had their appendix out, which is kind of cool. Makes me unique.